Today's show is going to be fantastic. We have Dr. Mandy in here, and she's going to be talking about the healing framework, which is a somatic framework. And somatic means just getting into your own body. It's a form of therapy, but it's actually a body based therapy versus just being in the mind. And she's going to really get into some of the nuances that we experience with our kids, our grandkids, or other family members when we're alienated, estranged, disconnected, or erased. And she's going to break down what's happening in a lot of these situations. She's going to give us tools that are practical to use to interrupt some of our behaviors and some of other people's behaviors. And I promise you, it's going to be life-changing. You don't want to miss it. This will give you a great opportunity not to go down a really deep, dark bunny hole where you're just going to get lost, and it's going to create a bunch of pain and hurt. This is an interruption to the system. This is some good stuff. So I would interact with different family members, my kids, possibly my sister, say my mom, and would get into these situations where I'd come in and maybe I'm a little bit nervous, a little bit anxious, and we start a conversation, and then the conversation starts to turn sideways. Maybe my voice is a little bit higher. Maybe I'm a little anxious, and so I'm trying to be a little bit bigger just to kind of protect myself. And then I see the other person start to get anxious and upset, and maybe they walk away, maybe they scream and shout, maybe something else happens. And the neat thing about working on recovery and practicing my emotional and spiritual regulation is I start to see these different places where I keep showing up in the same way, and I keep getting into conversations or interactions where stuff is really, really challenging. And especially with my kids, I show up, I just want to love them, I want to be a good dad, and sometimes I'm not in a great place. And then we can't really connect. Then we can't really be with each other. And then they start to get upset, or they start to get upregulated because they're going into this kind of like defensive state to take care of themselves. And today we're going to be talking with Dr. Mandy, who's helped me so much kind of get back into my body and understand different situations that are going on and react from a different kind of place. Like my life has changed from doing this mind-body somatic work, and what a great show. And then at the end of the show, I'm going to give you a couple really great tips on how to get back into your body, how to regulate yourself really quickly and pretty much anywhere. Welcome to Family Disappeared. My name is Lawrence Joss, and today we have a special surprise for you. We have Dr. Mandy here, and she's going to be talking about the healing framework, which she founded. And she's going to be talking about all different kinds of resources that you can use as a parent or grandparent or anyone that's disconnected, alienated, estranged, or possibly erased from a child or grandchild or other family member. So, Dr. Mandy, can you please take a couple seconds here and introduce yourself to the community?
I'm Dr. Mandy, she, her. I'm a somatic therapist and coach, and I developed the healing framework, which is a mind-body integration approach, and it really works with people to support them to learn to regulate their nervous system. And I'm really happy to be here today, and we're going to talk a lot about nervous system regulation in parents and in children. So thanks for having me, Lawrence.
Oh, it's so great to have you here, Dr. Mandy. And just for clarification for the audience out there, we're talking about a mind-body system, right? And traditionally, when you go to a therapist, it's kind of like talk therapy and you're up in the head. And mind body, if I'm correct, is more of a somatic approach. And can you just let everyone know what that kind of means? Because not everyone has been exposed to it before.
Mind-body integration is a somatic approach. And like you said, traditional therapy usually just deals with the mind. And so the approach that I use works to look at the body. So we're listening to what the body is communicating to us. So we want to go beyond words. We're connecting the mind with the body. A lot of the times our body is talking to us, like if we're anxious or something, we can pick up really important cues from our body that can help us to move forward and make really good decisions in our present situations.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And that's so important. And just to give folks a couple of examples, like if I'm having a chat with someone and I feel my lower back tighten up or my belly start to hurt or something like that, these are indications in the body that something's going on and I need to pay attention to those things, correct?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the times we don't really feel our bodies. So it's in the healing framework, we just start to simplify, simply check in with the body. Yeah, so if you're having a conversation and you notice like your diaphragm tightens up a little bit, then you might, and if your awareness is great, so that's the first step. If you're aware of it, that's awesome. You can check in and be like, "Oh, wow, I'm noticing that my diaphragm's tightening," and like maybe check in and see how you're feeling. It could be just an indication to check in. How am I feeling? Is something going on? Yeah, so they can be very minor, but it can give us a lot of information about, things that are happening in the moment.
Okay, just to add another layer to that, say I'm having a conversation with you, and all of a sudden I get angry or upset and I start acting out. What I'm feeling is just this acting out, this frustration and stuff with you, but there's actually a key indicator before that starts coming out of my mouth. Something else is happening, usually in my body, if I understand correctly. And most of the time, like you were saying, we're just not aware of what's happening in our body. So we're right up into the head, we're right up into the reaction. There is no pause.
Exactly. Yeah. So when you start to integrate the mind body tools, you're right. You can hear the messages before they're coming out of your mouth, right? Because normally we're just like, boom, we're in a state all of a sudden, and we're like, well, how did that happen? But when you start to like notice the body and look at what the body is communicating to you, yeah, it gives you that extra second. Like you can feel the body, and then you can decide what action to take rather than just going straight to the action of lashing out.
Mm, I love that. So it gives me a pause. It gives me the opportunity to check in with my body. It gives me the opportunity to change a dynamic with someone that's usually scary or upregulating or challenging. And in this case, we're talking about relationships with our kids, possibly grandkids and other family members that we might be completely disconnected from, or we might have minor connection with. So this is a way to show up as a more integrative and accessible person.
Absolutely. It can help you to be more present. You can show up more authentically, as who you are rather than in just a reaction from a reactionary place that, again, could be scary, especially if it's a child who is on the receiving end.
Awesome. So, everyone, we're going to get into some meat and some questions over here. So, this is going to be great stuff to listen to. You might have to listen to it a couple times because there's going to be some really great information and different layers of nuances for you to be able to pick up on. And at the end of the show, Dr. Mandy is going to share some great skills with you and also how to get hold of her and what you can do going forward if you decide this might be something interesting, whether it's with her or another somatic therapist that you find locally, whatever that avenue is. We're just going to present this channel to you and let you know that's available. So let's jump into the questions.
Let's go.
So, Dr. Mandy, if I'm like upset or sad or possibly even scared to interact with my child or my grandchild or some other family member, and I show up in this emotional state, what kind of effect would that have on the person that I'm interacting with? And in this case, let's just say a child, just for an example.
So, if you're a parent and you go to your child in a highly emotional state and you're pretty dysregulated, most likely the child is going to feel scared. They're going to feel this big energy and they're going to go into a nervous system state where they might feel they have to protect themselves.
And that all sounds great. I hear the kid might have to go into some kind of place in order to protect themselves. But again, I want to really be really intentional about clarifying some of these words we're using. And dysregulation just means that we're not necessarily in our body. We're not necessarily grounded. Again, if we're fearful, if we're anxious, if we got any of these things going on, usually we're dysregulated and we're not fully present. And as Dr. Mandy's saying, this is going to have an effect on any other person that we meet with, and especially a child that doesn't necessarily have the coping mechanisms and the skills we've developed over the years. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that, Dr. Mandy?
Just that kids are learning how to regulate their nervous systems from their parents. And so, if a parent hasn't quite learned how to regulate their nervous system, and again, like you're saying, this is really how to handle emotions. Like, if you haven't really learned how to handle like those bigger emotions like fear, and so you're going into more of like a survival, like a reactionary place. So kids learn that from their parents, and so if you do not have that, then the kid won't either. So if you're coming to a child from that space, they're definitely going to be feeling it, and they're also going to not necessarily know how to deal with those emotions either. I also want to just say that, especially because a child, if you just look at like the sheer size of a child, is much physically smaller, and an adult is much bigger. Like, so to have an adult that is in like a highly emotional state, can be very frightening, like physically, because the parent can appear enormous, to the child, especially when you think about their energy as well. And it can be really frightening for a child if a parent is coming, trying to engage them from that emotional state. It can be a lot of big, scary energy for a kid.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And for me personally, I remember when my youngest daughter was she was probably like 7 years old or something like that, and I was having a conversation with her, and I was just starting to work on my recovery and just starting to work on my emotional and spiritual ecosystem. And I am much bigger than she is, and I remember having some intensity to my voice, and she shrunk back. And it was the first time I was present enough to stay in my body to see that happen, and it just broke my heart. And if anyone else there has experienced something like that, it doesn't mean that you're bad or I'm bad or we're defective. We're just showing up with the tools and skills we learned in our family. And I share that story because it's really, really important. And these are the things, if you integrate somatic therapy and some of the mind body techniques, you'll be able to start noticing where there's a place to intervene in your behavior. And something else you mentioned, Dr. Mandy, you mentioned that we didn't necessarily learn some of these skills. And the place we would have learned these skills are in our family of origin. And again, if you're new to the show, family of origin would have been your parents, your siblings, whoever you were living in your house with at that particular time. And if I'm correct, most folks are coming in to any relationship with some form of dysregulation, right?
We all experience dysregulation. This is totally normal and biological. So, but the key is to know how to regulate yourself once you become dysregulated. So, yes, it's totally normal. We're all dysregulated at times. And the important thing is that we know how to get back to a state of regulation.
Great. And just to give folks some examples, like what might we see from a child if we're dysregulating them? What are like some key markers that would say, well, there's something going on here. Take a breath, slow down for a second, and try to be a little bit more present.
So if you're experiencing those big emotions and you're trying to engage your child, you might see some of the different states that they go into. So they might fight back or argue with you, and really what they're trying to communicate to you is that they're overwhelmed by your emotions and they really want you to calm down. So if your little kiddo starts fighting you back or saying things, they're really just letting you know that they're in a dysregulated state. They're overwhelmed by your emotions and they need you to calm down. That's what they're trying to communicate. Another thing is, some kids might go into flight, which is where they will physically leave the space. And they're telling you they're overwhelmed by the emotions that are coming at them, and they're not quite sure how to deal with them. And so they really just want to get out of there because they're trying to protect themselves. They're uncomfortable and they want to get out of there. And to do that, they feel like they need to leave the space.
Right. So they get scared, they get overwhelmed, they're trying to regulate their own nervous systems, and they're trying any kind of strategy that they might know of or they've seen other family members cope with, is what I'm hearing. And I also want to just widen this view a little bit. We're using the word kid, possibly kiddos, but this is young adults, this is grown adults. This is me too. Like I can get in a conversation with someone else and they might be regulated and I might get scared or I might get nervous and I might try all these different techniques as a 53-year-old man. So it's not just a kid. These are things that we take into every single relationship that we have. And I think it's just really important to include that in the conversation.
Absolutely. And what we learn when we are kiddos, we're going to take that, like you said, we're taking that with us into adulthood until we learn a different way. I want to go back also to, so some kids might also respond by freezing in the example that you gave. Sometimes like a kid will just get really small, like you might really physically see them shrink and they're just trying to get really small and they're freezing. And again, they're trying to tell you that they're overwhelmed by the emotions, and they're just hoping that you stop with the emotions and that you don't see them, and they just want you to calm down. So they're trying again to protect themselves by not being seen and by getting really small.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one provocative question here, and then we're going to actually do a quick regulation exercise and see what that feels like to folks. So, a lot of folks in our community will say a child lashes out. They say, I hate you. I never want to see you again. Right. And when they're doing that, they're just saying, hey, back up, buddy. I need some space. There's too much coming at me. Is that correct? Like the stuff is not necessarily personal when they're expressing stuff. It's survival. Like they feel like they're gonna die if they don't get some space at any age.
Absolutely. That is all just a form of protection. And it really just means they haven't learned to communicate those emotions. And that's how they're communicating it, by saying, I hate you, go away, leave me alone. They're just trying to protect themselves. But really there's something underneath it, and they don't quite know how to express that yet. And so if you're in that situation, one of the best things you can do is not react to what's actually coming out of their mouths, not reacting to that, I hate you, leave me alone. Instead, if you could try to feel into what the child is experiencing underneath, can you identify the hurt, the fear, and really reflect on that and just reflect back what's actually happening underneath. Is the kid hurt? Are they embarrassed? Are they feeling scared? If you can reflect that back, then that can help the child also learn to connect with what they are feeling. And another important thing is that you need to check in with yourself too, so that you're not coming from a reactionary place. And if you can do that, then you can model how to communicate in those situations. But if you just blow up and respond to the dysregulated state and take it personal, then you're just going to reinforce the dysregulation and that other way of communicating. So you have an opportunity to help model some healthy ways to really handle these emotions that the kid's struggling with.
I love that. Yeah. We need to show them a different path forward. And again, we're covering a lot of subject matter here. And as you hear Dr. Mandy say, you need to regulate, take a breath, not be reactive. To me, that would sound overwhelming if I'm in the middle of this trauma and trying to figure stuff out. And that's the beauty of the overall arch. So we have support group meetings. PAA, which is Parental Alienation Anonymous. There's a link in the show notes. If you need support, if you need community, if you need help working through these stuff, if you need help working through your reactions and how you show up, that's the point of a 12-step group. That's the point of the support. And we also have trainings in NVC, which is nonviolent communication. And when Dr. Mandy's saying, hey, reflect something back to your kid, and you don't know what any of that means, nonviolent communication will give you some incredibly practical skills on what to use. We also have free trainings in meditation. And in meditation, you get back into your body, you get to take a breath, you'll start to notice how your body clenches up and moves and stuff like that. You don't learn everything from your therapist. You go out and you practice and you cultivate the things, and professionals are a necessity. Dr. Mandy's a necessity, and doing your own work outside of that environment on a daily, hourly basis is really where the gold is. So Dr. Mandy, after my little of a long speech there, can you do something quickly for us that will help us regulate for a second? And if anyone's going to try this, please be in a safe place. If you're driving, don't do it. If you're doing something unsafe, don't do it. Save it for later and practice this exercise later. So just something quick and easy we could try. Dr. Mandy, is that cool with you?
Yes, it is.
Okay, bring it on. Let's see what you got.
Okay, we're going to do a simple breath exercise where we just do some slow, deep breaths. Really simple. You can do it mostly anywhere. Again, don't do this while you're driving. Maybe not everywhere, right? So if you're not driving, no. So go ahead. If you're comfortable, you can close your eyes. You can keep them open too. It's totally up to you. I also like to put a hand on my chest and one on my diaphragm. And we're just going to take some slow, deep breaths. You're going to go inhale through your nose and exhale through your nose, and really let your exhale go. Like fully exhale. Don't force it. Let it be natural, but your exhale should be just a little bit longer than your inhale. So let's go ahead and take about 3 slow, deep breaths. In through the nose, and then out through the nose. In through the nose, out through the nose. In through the nose, and out through the nose. And then after you take the breaths, it's important to check back in with yourself and notice how your body's feeling after you take some slow deep breaths, because normally we take some slow deep breaths if we're in like more of like an activated space, or if you're anxious or upset. Taking some slow deep breaths can really calm you down. So checking back in with your body and noticing any shifts, and that's a really small mind body integration piece. It's really just about checking in.
That's awesome. And I just want to point out, like my experience, I'm sitting here doing an interview and taking Dr. Mandy's direction. I'm taking the 3 slow deep breaths, and I start to feel some like tingling in my arms and a little bit of like tingling in my solar plexus. And for me, I identify that as anxiety. And I am doing a podcast and I feel a little bit anxious. And I didn't feel any of that before Dr. Mandy gave me the direction. And the purpose is these things are always happening in our inner ecosystem all the time, but we're usually too busy or too distracted or whatever to really know what's going on in our body. And this intervention is a way to intervene before we interact with people from this place of anxiety or fear or whatever, so we don't have to escalate a situation.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. I also felt, even though it was like a few short breaths, I felt my diaphragm relax because I'm a little anxious also.
I love that you said that my response was excellent. It makes me feel just happy.
You're a
Okay,
good
I have some.
student.
I have some follow up questions for you here.
Okay.
So mirroring, I think, is really important. And for anyone out there, like mirroring is if I'm having a conversation with you and you're actually like seeing me and understanding what's going on, and it feels like we're having a similar conversation. So the mirroring question I'm going to ask is I'm having a conversation with my young adult child, daughter, son, whatever it is, and I'm somewhat anxious and stuff. Then when they're getting dysregulated or their nervous system's kind of moving in different directions because I'm not regulated, then they start mirroring my behavior. Is that accurate all the time, some of the time, part of the time?
I guess I would say it depends on their state of their nervous system. If they have learned to regulate their nervous system, they might be more equipped to handle. If they're in a grounded space, then they might be better equipped to handle someone coming into their space with a dysregulated nervous system. However, I would say most of the time they're going to pick up and mirror your dysregulated nervous system state.
So I'm in an interaction with someone and I'm somewhat scared or anxious, and the person I'm with starts to mirror part of that back to me. The question I have is there an opportunity for some meaningful, deep connection when we are in that state or when I'm in that state?
No,
That's funny, right? That's a full sentence. No, thank you. Yes, we need to hear that because I know for me, I come into conversation with my kids and I'm dysregulated. The conversation starts going sideways, and I want to make it that they're doing something wrong to me, or they can't hear me, or they don't understand what's happening. But as you're saying, there's no opportunity for real deep connection when people aren't necessarily available and present.
right? Because we're essentially in a survival mode and we're not in a connecting space. We're in actually a space of disconnection. So if you're trying to protect yourself and you're in some kind of nervous system state, you're actively creating disconnection. So it's actually the opposite of connection. And we're not fully present when we're in those states. And so, yeah, we're just not able to, our brains kicked into some kind of like survival mode, and we're just not able to actually have authentic connection during those moments.
And what as a parent, grandparent, adult, what would you do to regulate that situation, or at least give the opportunity to the situation to calm down and not be so inflammatory?
If you're a parent and you're feeling upregulated, dysregulated, and you notice it, first off, congratulations. That's awesome because that's the first step in like changing some kind of cycle that you might be in. So you can model some healthy behavior by one, acknowledging, hey, I'm not really in this space to have this conversation. And I need to go and take a couple minutes to just kind of recenter myself. And you can just communicate this to your child. And then I would step away and, go take some slow, deep breaths that we just practiced. And those can help to physically calm you down and soothe your nervous system.
And I would say there's one piece that it feels like may be necessary is to actually set a time when you're going to re-engage with the child. So I would think their nervous system and my nervous system would relax if I'm actually saying I'm stepping away and let's meet up in an hour. How does that sound? Is that appropriate?
Yes, yes, excellent. Again, excellent. No.
I get an A again. I love it.
Yes,
I'm
because
going to tell everyone.
A plus. Yeah, because a child doesn't know what's happening. Like, well, depending on their age, of course, it's always good to set a container for, yes, we will be coming back to this. If you don't come back to it, a child is going to internalize it, and they'll probably end up blaming themselves for your emotional state because they don't understand what happened. So I do think it's really important, one, to let them know when you're going to come back, and then to actually follow through with it and go ahead and let them know what happened, communicate to them. It's really important to let a child know that your emotional response wasn't their fault, because they don't know that unless you share that. So please go ahead and just make sure to let the kid know that what happened was not their fault, and you can explain what happened to yourself, and that can model like how to handle these big emotions, how you processed it. I mean, you don't have to go too far into the weeds because you don't want to, try to get your needs met through your child, but you just want to communicate and demonstrate that it wasn't their fault.
And when you were saying the child might think that they've done something wrong, I viscerally had a feeling in the middle of my chest, like of this deep weight just pushing on me, because I know that I've left a lot of situations like that where the child's been dysregulated and I haven't let them know when I'm going to be back because no one ever told me to do that. And I'm so appreciative that you bring that up and you're explaining to us in the community, like, hey, there's steps to take here where we can re-regulate, and we can also acknowledge if we've created some kind of harm, and we can give whoever we're dealing with, whether it's a child, a young adult, a regular adult, or anyone else, like, hey, wow, yeah, that was rough. It might not have gone so well. Own our part and say, can we meet in an hour? Can we meet tomorrow? Can we meet in 3 hours? And I want to point out something that's really important here, that it's a negotiation. Like if I want to meet in an hour and someone else isn't available to meet in an hour and they want to meet in a day, like it's a negotiation. Like this is for everyone. It's not just for us to feel better, but it's for everyone to have an opportunity to heal. So just to recap on today's episode, and this is part one of part two because we were not able to get in everything today. You started to learn about what it looked like when you showed up in a conversation and weren't really regulated. You got to identify different states and how to get back into your body. Dr. Mandy gave us a really brief exercise where we can just take a couple breaths and get back into our body. And we also got to start to understand what our child or grandchild or other folks in our life might be experiencing when we show up in a state of dysregulation, in a state of anxiety or fear, and then what can happen and how that situation can kind of fall apart really, really, really quickly. And also how we can make minor repairs and how we can set up a time later to discuss stuff and work through stuff when people are actually in a place where they'll be able to connect. So whatever you do, I want to make sure you click the link below for Dr. Mandy's free training. Check that out. see if it's useful. There's also a link in the show notes for PAA, which is Parental Alienation Anonymous, a free support group where you can start working with other parents on recovering your emotional and spiritual ecosystem. It's an incredibly great, loving community. There's another link in the show notes for meditation. You can learn about meditation. And we're introducing meditation again because it's another way to learn to regulate yourself so you can show up in conversations more embodied. And we're also going to put the link down there for NVC, which is nonviolent communication. And so much of what Dr. Mandy was talking about today and in the next episode is about communicating with yourself, and then communicating outwardly with your kids or grandkids or someone else in your life. So I told you in the beginning of the show that I was going to give you a grounding exercise that you could use to kind of get back into your body. And Dr. Mandy introduced the idea of breath, right? So breath is to get back into your body. And once you're starting to get back into your body, you want to start to feel your body parts. So what I want you to do is whenever you're feeling like dysregulated or you're in an argument and you're kind of left your body and you don't know what to do, taking the breath that Dr. Mandy said is incredibly useful. But I want you to like stomp your feet on the ground, maybe take your arms and tap up and down your arms, start to get some energy moving in your body, tap your chest, maybe your belly, your inner thighs, and you'll see you'll start to generate a little bit of energy in the body. And what this is going to do is it's going to bring you back from this more ethereal, higher energy kind of place, and it's going to bring you back down into your body. And you add a couple of breaths and you'll start to feel, oh, here I am. Here I am. I'm not my anger. I'm not my anxiety. I'm not this fight that I'm having with someone. I'm actually my body. And once you start to get back into your body, then you can use some of the other tools that Dr. Mandy has introduced you to or you've learned on your show to re-engage in whatever conversation it is. And I promise you, the more you get back into your body, the more that you're really present, the less harm and damage you're going to do. Like this pathology is really, 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 really challenging, and we make it worse. And we get to interrupt that, and we get to show up differently in the future. So good luck. These things are really simple, but they're life changing. And you just practice these really, really, really simple tools one day at a time, and you will definitely see some change. And just a last reminder, part 2 of Dr. Mandy is going to be next week, and we're going to be continuing the conversation we started today. So you definitely don't want to miss that. I will see you then. And there's also going to be a link to the Family Hope Project. And we didn't really get to talk about this on the show, but the Family Hope Project is a virtual art gallery that we're using to educate people about alienation, estrangement, disconnection. It's an advocacy site, it's an education site, and it's a community site. And anything you submit there is completely anonymous. So we're really asking you to participate in this. It's worldwide. We're working with organizations all over the world, and we just want to amplify everyone's voices so there can start to be some kind of systemic change in the world. And lastly, there's a link if you want to donate and help support what we're doing. All our services are 100% free. We are a nonprofit. We rely on folks like you that are getting some kind of resources out of this. So you know a family member that's struggling and you want to support having resources for anyone really to be able to use and to tap into. And thank you so much for joining the show and staying with us. And we will see you for part 2 on the next show. Oh, yeah. And I forget social media. Share this on any of your social media feeds. Let people know that we're out there and we're helping parents and families reunite and work on some of their stuff. And please, please share the podcast with anyone it might be useful to.